Millionaire freezes when he sees twins with a birthmark like his. Boy, are you our father? Before starting to watch this story, tell us in the comments section from which city you're watching this story. Let's enjoy this story. At a prestigious charity gala in New York City, Jeremy Andrews, a well-known entrepreneur, walked into the glittering ballroom with a sense of anticipation. The night was meant to be a celebration of his recent accomplishments and an opportunity to expand his business network, but Jeremy was feeling more disconnected than usual. The extravagance of the event, the luxury cars, the world-class catering, the carefully curated guest list, felt almost hollow to him. As a self-made millionaire, he had seen it all, but tonight, something was different. He scanned the room looking for familiar faces, but a sudden shift in his thoughts was triggered when his eyes landed on a pair of children. They were twins, standing by the entrance with their mother, who appeared to be in a quiet conversation with a few other guests. The twins were no older than 8 or 9 years old, but there was something striking about them that caught Jeremy's attention. It wasn't just the fact that they were beautiful children with dark, wavy hair and bright blue eyes. What made them truly stand out was the unmistakable birthmark on each of their wrists. It was a strange mark, almost a faded scar, shaped like a crescent moon. Jeremy's heart skipped a beat. His own wrist bore an identical mark, a peculiar birthmark that he had never thought twice about. It had always been a conversation starter when he was younger, but over time, it became just another part of him, something he didn't think about often. As he watched the twins, he felt a wave of recognition he couldn't quite place. He stood frozen, his thoughts racing. Could it be? Could these children somehow be connected to him? He quickly brushed the thought aside. It was a ridiculous notion. He didn't have any children. There was no way. But the more he looked at them, the more it felt like there was something undeniable about the way they seemed to look back at him as if they knew him. He tried to shake off the strange feeling, convincing himself it was just his imagination running wild. But as the evening went on, Jeremy couldn't seem to take his eyes off the twins. Whenever he passed by them in the room, he noticed their gaze following him. And every time they saw him looking, they quickly turned away as if they were playing some kind of game. It was unsettling, but it also piqued his curiosity. His mind kept returning to the idea that they shared a connection he couldn't explain. He had grown up in a small town outside of Philadelphia and had lived a relatively simple life until his 20s, when a few key business deals propelled him into the upper echelons of the corporate world. His past was uncomplicated, at least that's what he had always believed. He'd had a few relationships along the way, but none that had ever lasted. He wasn't the fatherly type, and the thought of children was something that didn't enter his mind often. Yet, the twins' eyes, their quiet smiles, and that birthmark kept nagging at him. Eventually, the twins' mother, a woman named Rachel, approached him. She was an elegant figure in a navy blue gown, her blonde hair pinned up in an understated but sophisticated style. She introduced herself, but it was her next words that caught him off guard. "Are you Jeremy Andrews?" she asked, her voice calm but with an undercurrent of something else, something he couldn't quite pinpoint. "Yes, that's me," he replied, surprised by the directness of her question. "I've heard a lot about you. My children Emma and Ethan wanted to meet you tonight." She gestured toward the twins, who were now standing silently behind her. Jeremy smiled politely, but before he could say anything else, Ethan, the boy with a slightly more serious expression, looked up at him with wide, innocent eyes and asked, "Boy, are you our father?" Jeremy felt as though the ground had been pulled out from under him. His breath caught in his throat, and his mind raced to process what the boy had just said. The room seemed to spin for a moment as he stared at the child in disbelief. He opened his mouth to speak but couldn't find the words. The twins looked at him expectantly, as if they knew him, as if they were waiting for him to confirm something they already suspected. Rachel noticed the change in Jeremy's expression and quickly stepped in, her voice softening. "I'm sorry. I know this is a lot to process. I wasn't sure how to bring it up, but I think it's time you met them. We've been wanting to meet you for a long time." Jeremy stood there, his mind a blur of thoughts. He wasn't sure what was happening, but he couldn't ignore the strange pull he felt toward these children. The resemblance to him was uncanny. He couldn't fathom how this was possible. He had never met Rachel before as far as he could remember. He had no recollection of any past relationship that would lead to these children. His heart raced as he forced himself to stay calm. Rachel smiled faintly as if she understood his confusion. "Jeremy, I know this is a lot to take in, but I think it's time we talked. There's a lot more to this story than you know." He looked down at the twins once again. They were standing still, waiting patiently for him to respond, their eyes full of curiosity. Ethan's question echoed in his mind. "Boy, are you our father?" Was this some kind of joke? A prank set up by someone who knew him? But the more he looked at them, the more he realized it wasn't a joke. The twins were serious, and somehow he was connected to them in a way he couldn't explain. He felt the weight of the situation begin to sink in. Rachel continued, "It's been a long time, but I think you should know the truth about Emma and Ethan. They deserve to know who you are." Before he could respond, the twins turned and walked back toward their mother, their small hands held together. The room seemed to quiet down, and Jeremy was left standing there, grappling with the strange realization that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. How could he be the father of these children? And more importantly, why hadn't anyone told him about them before? His mind raced, but all he could do was stand there, rooted to the spot, unsure of what to do next. Before going to the next, please subscribe to our channel, like and share with friends. Jeremy spent the rest of the evening in a daze, unable to shake the strange encounter with the twins and their mother, Rachel. His mind kept circling back to the question that had been posed to him, "Boy, are you our father?" The words kept echoing in his head, growing louder and more insistent with every passing second. He had no idea what was happening or why he was being dragged into this bizarre situation, but one thing was clear. His life had just been turned upside down. The next morning, Jeremy sat at his breakfast table in his Manhattan penthouse, staring out at the city skyline. The sun had just begun to rise, casting long shadows across the room. He hadn't slept much the night before, his thoughts a whirlwind of confusion and doubt. How could he be the father of these children? The more he thought about it, the more he realized how little he knew about his past. He had lived a life focused solely on his business empire, pushing aside any personal relationships. There had been women here and there, fleeting romances that never lasted, and certainly no children. Or so he thought. The events of the previous night seemed like a distant dream. He had spent years building his fortune, focusing on expanding his company, but somewhere in the back of his mind, there was always the nagging feeling that something was missing. He had never stopped to consider the possibility of a family, of being a father. It had never been part of the plan. Yet, here he was, facing a reality that was so far removed from the life he had carefully constructed. As Jeremy sat lost in thought, his phone buzzed, pulling him back to the present. It was a message from Rachel. "Jeremy, I know you're probably overwhelmed right now, but I think it's time we had a serious conversation. I'd like to explain everything. Please let me know when you're available." The message made his stomach churn. He wasn't sure he was ready for another bombshell. Part of him wanted to ignore it, to pretend the whole thing never happened. But another part of him, the part that couldn't shake the image of the twins, knew he needed answers. He needed to understand what was going on. After a few moments of indecision, Jeremy typed back a response. "I'll meet you today. Let's say 3 p.m. at your place." Rachel's reply came almost instantly, "That works. I'll send you my address." By 3 p.m., Jeremy found himself standing in front of a modest brownstone in Brooklyn. The neighborhood was a far cry from the glamorous high-end areas of Manhattan he was used to, but there was something oddly comforting about it. The building itself was unassuming, with ivy creeping up the brick walls, and the front door was a simple wood frame with a brass knocker. As he rang the doorbell, he couldn't help but feel a knot tighten in his stomach. What was he walking into? Was this some sort of elaborate hoax, or was there a chance, just a small one, that he really was the father of those twins? Rachel answered the door almost immediately, her face welcoming but still carrying a hint of anxiety. She motioned for him to come in, and as Jeremy stepped inside, he was struck by the warmth of the space. It was nothing like the sterile, modern decor of his penthouse. The living room was cozy, with a large couch, an array of family photos, and a few toys scattered across the floor. Emma and Ethan were sitting at the kitchen table, playing with crayons, but as soon as they saw Jeremy, they stopped and stared at him. Jeremy felt an uncomfortable shiver run down his spine. Their gaze was intense, almost as if they knew him from some distant memory. Rachel led him to the kitchen, where they both sat down at the small wooden table. The room was quiet for a moment before Rachel spoke. "I'm sure you have a lot of questions. You probably think I'm crazy, and maybe I am. But I never meant to keep this from you. It never seemed like the right time." Jeremy looked at her, his mind racing. "What are you talking about, Rachel? How could I possibly be their father? I don't even remember you." Rachel's expression softened, but there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. "I understand that this is a lot to process. I'm not asking you to believe me right away. But I think it's important that you hear the whole story." She paused, collecting her thoughts before continuing. "Years ago, when I was living in Boston, I met someone. We didn't know each other for long, but there was a connection. We spent one unforgettable night together. And then you left just like that. I didn't know how to find you and I never thought you'd want anything to do with me. But a few months later, I discovered I was pregnant. Jeremy's mind was reeling. He remembered his time in Boston, but he couldn't place Rachel's face. It was a time in his life when he had been caught up in his career and personal ambitions, focused solely on himself. He had never imagined that one night could have led to this. Rachel continued, I didn't tell you because I wasn't sure what I could offer my children. I raised Emma and Ethan on my own with no help from anyone. They've always known that I'm their mother and I've tried to give them everything they need. But there's always been a part of me that wanted them to know who their father was. Jeremy felt a lump form in his throat. He had never thought about the impact his actions could have had on someone else's life. He had always been so consumed by his own world that he had never considered the consequences of his choices. And now, standing in front of him were the results of a night he couldn't even fully remember. 2 children who had been living without a father their whole lives. I never wanted to hurt you, Jeremy. I just didn't know how to tell you, Rachel said softly. Jeremy sat in silence, his mind struggling to make sense of everything. How had he not known? How had he lived his life for all these years, blissfully unaware that he had children out there? It seemed impossible, yet here he was, facing the reality of it. As the conversation continued, Rachel explained that she had kept in touch with a few mutual acquaintances who had known Jeremy back in the day, and it was through them that she had finally found him. She had wanted to wait until the twins were old enough to understand, but the desire to connect had finally led her to reach out. Jeremy didn't know what to say. He wasn't ready for this. His world, which had been so carefully built around his career and success, had just been shattered. He looked at the twins once again, their faces full of innocence, and for the first time he wondered if maybe he could be a part of their lives. Maybe it wasn't too late. Before going to the next, please subscribe to our channel, like and share with friends. Jeremy's mind was still in turmoil as he left Rachel's brownstone in Brooklyn that evening. The weight of the conversation with her hung heavily on his shoulders, as though a fog had descended over his entire existence. The air outside was crisp, the sky clear, but his thoughts were anything but clear. He couldn't escape the questions that kept echoing in his mind. How had he been so blind? How had he spent his entire life without even considering that he could be a father? The drive back to Manhattan was long, but it gave him the time he needed to process everything that had been revealed. The twins, Emma and Ethan, looked so much like him, or at least like the younger version of himself he could barely remember. The birthmark on their wrists was uncanny, almost as if it had been placed there by some twist of fate. And yet, the realization that they could be his children felt almost impossible to accept. The idea of fatherhood had always seemed distant to Jeremy. He had been so focused on his career, building his company from the ground up, that he had never once thought about settling down or starting a family. Relationships had always taken a back seat to his ambition. But now, staring at the city lights below him, he couldn't help but feel like something was missing. Something he had never known he needed until it was right in front of him. That night, Jeremy tried to sleep, but his mind wouldn't let him. The image of the twins' faces, their eyes staring back at him with such intensity, kept him awake. He had to find out more. He needed answers. The next morning he called his assistant, Karen, and asked her to schedule a meeting with a private investigator. He wasn't sure what he was hoping to uncover, but something about the situation didn't sit right with him. He needed to know the truth, even if it meant uncovering things he wasn't ready to face. The investigator, a seasoned professional named Dave, met Jeremy in his office later that week. Dave was a no-nonsense kind of guy, someone who had seen it all and was used to dealing with delicate situations. As Jeremy explained the details of his encounter with Rachel and the twins, Dave listened attentively, jotting down notes and asking a few clarifying questions. "So, let me get this straight," Dave said, leaning back in his chair. "You don't remember Rachel, but she claims you're the father of her twins, and they have a birthmark identical to yours. She's got your attention, and now you want me to find out if there's any truth to this?" Jeremy nodded, feeling a knot form in his stomach. "Exactly. I'm not sure if I'm being manipulated or if this is some kind of coincidence, but I need to know if what she's saying is real. I've never been one for surprises, and this one is big." Dave took a long look at him before speaking again. "All right. I'll run a background check on Rachel and dig into anything I can find that links you to her. I'll also look into her claims about the twins. It'll take a few days, but I'll get to the bottom of this." Jeremy agreed to the plan, and as he left the office, he felt a strange sense of unease. He wasn't sure what he was hoping to find, but the truth was something he desperately needed. He had to know if these children, who seemed to have appeared out of nowhere, were really his. Days passed, and as Jeremy went about his usual routine, the investigation into Rachel's claims continued in the background. He kept his distance from her, unsure of what to say or how to proceed. But every time he saw the twins in his mind's eye, something inside him stirred. He didn't know what it was, but there was a pull, a connection, that he couldn't explain. One evening, just as Jeremy was getting ready to leave the office for the day, his phone buzzed with a message from Dave. The investigator had uncovered something significant. Jeremy's heart raced as he opened the message. "Jeremy," it began. "I've found something. Rachel isn't lying. There's a connection between you and the twins. I've traced the birthmark, and it appears to be a genetic marker linked to a rare condition that only a few people share. It's highly unlikely that this is a coincidence. I'll need more time to dig into the full details, but this is looking more and more like the truth." The message left Jeremy stunned. He sat at his desk, staring at the screen, trying to process the information. A genetic marker? Was it possible that these children, whom he had just met, were actually his biological children? And if they were, how had he never known? How had Rachel kept this from him for so long? He couldn't deny that the evidence was mounting, and it was starting to feel like a dream. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that this wasn't just some fantasy. This was real life. These children, who had been living without a father, could very well be his. The next few days were a blur. Jeremy couldn't focus on anything else. Every moment was consumed with thoughts of the twins, Rachel, and the investigation. He knew he had to face this head-on, but the uncertainty of it all was overwhelming. What kind of father would he be? What kind of relationship could he possibly have with these children, especially after all this time? He decided to visit Rachel again. He needed to speak with her, to ask her more questions and try to understand the full picture. When he arrived at her brownstone, his nerves were on edge. But when Rachel answered the door, there was something different about her. She seemed more composed, more at ease, as though she knew what was coming. "Jeremy, it's good to see you," Rachel said, her voice warm but guarded. She motioned for him to come inside, and they sat down in the living room. The twins were playing in the next room, and the sounds of their laughter filled the air. "I've been thinking a lot about everything you said," Jeremy began, his voice steady but uncertain. "And I've had a private investigator look into the situation. He's found some things that, well, they're pointing in your favor." Rachel's expression softened, and she nodded slowly. "I knew you would find the truth eventually. I wasn't sure when or how, but I didn't want to keep this from you forever. I just wanted you to know the truth when you were ready." Jeremy took a deep breath. "I don't know what to say. I don't remember anything about our past, but the more I look at the twins, the more I see something. A connection." Rachel smiled faintly, her eyes filled with emotion. "You don't have to say anything right now. We'll take this one step at a time." Jeremy nodded, still trying to process everything. As he looked at the twins, their laughter and innocence filled the room, and for the first time in his life, he wondered if he was finally ready to be part of something bigger than himself. Before going to the next, please subscribe to our channel, like and share with friends. Jeremy spent the next few days in a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. The investigation into Rachel's claims was moving fast, and the evidence was slowly but surely pointing to the reality that Emma and Ethan were indeed his children. He had always thought of himself as a practical man, someone who dealt with facts and figures, never indulging in fantasies or uncertain possibilities. But this was a different kind of truth, one that felt almost surreal. Rachel had been kind and patient with him, allowing him the space he needed to process everything, but Jeremy still didn't know what to do. Could he really be a father after all this time? He had spent his entire life building his empire, his businesses, his investments, his reputation, but none of that prepared him for what he was facing now. Emma and Ethan were real, tangible children with their own lives, their own personalities, and their own needs. Could he step into their world as their father, or was it too late? The more he thought about it, the more it became clear that he couldn't just walk away. There was something about those children, something about their eyes, their laughter, and even their mischievous ways, that stirred something deep inside him. The birthmark on their wrists, the one that mirrored his own, couldn't be ignored. It felt like the universe was pointing him in a direction he hadn't anticipated, and Jeremy had never been the kind of man to back down from a challenge. If he was truly their father, he owed it to them to at least try. That Friday evening, after a long day of meetings at his office in Manhattan, Jeremy made a decision. He called Rachel and asked if he could spend some time with the twins. He had been avoiding them up until now, afraid of what would happen if he got too close. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that if he was going to be a part of their lives, he needed to take the first step. "Rachel, I want to meet the kids. I need to understand who they are and I need to be sure. I think it's time. Rachel's voice on the other end of the line was soft but encouraging. I understand, Jeremy. They've been asking about you. They're excited to see you. Just come by whenever you're ready. It felt like an eternity before he finally arrived at Rachel's brownstone in Brooklyn. The evening was cool and the streets of the city were bustling with activity. He parked his car and walked up the steps to the front door, his heart pounding in his chest. He had no idea what he was walking into, but he knew it was a pivotal moment in his life. When Rachel opened the door, she greeted him with a warm smile. She led him inside, and the sound of children's laughter echoed through the house. It was then that he realized how much he had been avoiding this moment. He had been scared, unsure of how to approach the situation, but now that he was here, he couldn't turn back. Emma and Ethan were playing in the living room, building some kind of elaborate structure with their toys. When they saw him, they froze for a moment, staring at him with wide eyes. Jeremy felt a wave of nervousness wash over him, but he took a deep breath and smiled. Hi, he said softly, trying to sound as casual as possible. I'm Jeremy. The twins blinked at him for a moment, and then Emma, the older of the two, stood up and walked over to him. She had the same bright blue eyes as him, the same mischievous smile that seemed to suggest she knew something he didn't. She stopped just in front of him, looking up with an intensity that made Jeremy's heart skip a beat. You're our daddy, right? She asked, her voice surprisingly steady for a 6-year-old. Jeremy froze, not knowing how to respond. He had expected some kind of awkwardness, maybe a question about where he'd been all these years, but this was a direct, unflinching question that cut straight to the heart of the matter. He had no answer. Not yet, at least. Before he could speak, Ethan, who had been more reserved, stood up and walked over too. He looked up at Jeremy with a quiet curiosity, his face mirroring the same features that Jeremy saw in the mirror every morning. You look like us, Ethan said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. The words hit Jeremy like a freight train. He could no longer deny the connection. These were his children, and whether he was ready or not, he had to start acting like their father. Rachel came over to them, her eyes soft with emotion. They've been asking about you for months, Jeremy. I know this is a lot, and I don't expect everything to change overnight. But I want them to have you in their lives. You're their father, and they deserve to know you. Jeremy took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. It wasn't just about his feelings, it was about what was best for the twins. He had to make a decision now before they became too attached and then found themselves hurt when he disappeared again. He had been absent for so long, but he couldn't afford to be a stranger anymore. I don't know where to begin, he admitted, his voice full of uncertainty. I don't know what kind of father I'll be. Rachel nodded, understanding. You don't have to have all the answers right now. Just take it one day at a time. They're patient, Jeremy. They'll wait for you to figure it out. The twins, sensing the tension in the room, both took Jeremy's hands and tugged him toward the floor, where they had been playing. They wanted him to join in their game, to be a part of their world, even if just for that moment. And so, Jeremy found himself sitting cross-legged on the floor, building a tower with blocks, laughing with them, and slowly starting to realize that this wasn't so hard after all. Over the next few weeks, Jeremy spent more time with Rachel and the twins, getting to know them better. He was still unsure of how to navigate fatherhood, but he found himself making small progress every day. He learned that Emma loved to read books, her favorite being stories about faraway lands and magical creatures, while Ethan was fascinated by animals, particularly dinosaurs. They both had a boundless energy and curiosity that Jeremy couldn't help but admire. He found himself looking forward to their visits, even though he was still learning how to be the father they needed. The more time he spent with them, the more he realized how much he had been missing all these years. But it wasn't just the children he was getting to know, it was also Rachel. She had always been kind, understanding, and patient with him, but he was starting to see another side of her. A side that was strong, nurturing, and fiercely protective of her children. He admired her more than he ever thought possible. Jeremy still wasn't sure where all of this was going, but he knew one thing for certain. He was in this now. He couldn't walk away, not when he had finally found something that mattered more than his career, more than his wealth. Emma and Ethan were his children, and he was their father. It was time to start acting like it. Before going to the next, please subscribe to our channel, like and share with friends. Jeremy's life had drastically changed in the past few weeks. Every morning as he looked at himself in the mirror, he saw more than just the man who built his empire from the ground up. He saw a father. The weight of that realization was still settling in, and though he wasn't entirely sure what to expect, there was a quiet determination inside him now. He had gone from being a man focused entirely on his business to someone who had to figure out how to build a family. And that was no small task. The twins, Emma and Ethan, had grown accustomed to his presence, and it was becoming more natural for him to be around them. At first, their relationship had been awkward. He was a stranger to them, a man who appeared out of nowhere with little explanation. But as days turned into weeks, Jeremy began to feel an undeniable bond with them. There were moments when he would catch Emma smiling at him the same way she had at the beginning, as if she knew something he didn't, and it made him laugh. Ethan, on the other hand, was quieter but increasingly affectionate, tugging at his sleeve or asking him questions about everything from dinosaurs to the stars. It was clear they were both searching for something in him, something that Jeremy wasn't sure he could fully give yet. Rachel too had been an anchor. The more time he spent with her, the more he admired her strength. Raising 2 kids on her own for so many years couldn't have been easy, and yet she seemed to handle it with such grace. There were times when he would catch her looking at him as if she was waiting for him to make a decision, to give her a clear indication of whether or not he was ready to be a father. He hadn't exactly said it out loud, but in his actions he was trying to show her that he was ready. But there was still so much to learn. One Friday evening, after a long week of board meetings and a conference call that had left him drained, Jeremy decided to invite Rachel and the twins to his penthouse in downtown Manhattan. It wasn't the kind of place a family would normally visit, but he had a strange feeling that it was time to take the next step. Maybe this was his way of showing them that he was serious about his newfound role as their father. He had never been a sentimental person, but as he glanced around his luxurious apartment, he realized it wasn't the walls or the furnishings that mattered. It was the people he invited into his life that would make it meaningful. When they arrived, Emma and Ethan couldn't help but run around, exploring every corner of his apartment with wide-eyed wonder. Jeremy watched them for a moment, amused at how they saw everything as an adventure. Emma, of course, was the first to comment on his massive collection of books. She loved to read and Jeremy knew it. He had made sure to stock up on some of the best children's books that would appeal to her. As they sat together on his couch, with Ethan climbing onto his lap and Emma sitting beside him, he realized something profound. This was what it meant to be a family. It wasn't about fancy dinners or expensive gifts. It was the quiet moments like this, the ones that made everything feel real. Rachel was sitting across from him, watching the interaction between him and the kids. Her eyes were warm, but there was also a hint of uncertainty there. She knew Jeremy was trying, but she wasn't sure if he fully understood the depth of what being a father meant. She had done everything alone for so long, and now, seeing him step into this role, she wasn't sure if it was too late for him to catch up. "How are you feeling about all of this?" Rachel asked, her voice soft, but there was an underlying seriousness in her tone. She wasn't asking about his business or his wealth, but about what mattered most: his connection with the kids. Jeremy paused, the weight of her question sinking in. He had been thinking about it a lot lately. On the surface, everything seemed to be going well. He had started to build a relationship with Emma and Ethan, and they seemed to enjoy spending time with him. But there was more to being a father than just playing games and having fun. There was the responsibility, the sacrifices, and the understanding that their lives were intertwined with his now. "I don't know," he finally admitted. "I'm still figuring it out. I never expected this, to be a dad, but I know I want to be here for them. It's just, I don't know how to make up for all the time I've lost." Rachel nodded, her expression thoughtful. "You can't make up for the lost time, Jeremy. But you can be here now. And that matters. They're not asking you for perfection, they just want to know you care." Her words hit him like a ton of bricks. It was true. He couldn't undo the past, but he could be present now. And in many ways that was the most important thing. The past couldn't be rewritten, but the future was still open. He could still make a difference in their lives. As the evening wore on, they all sat down to dinner at the large, sleek table Jeremy had inherited from his late father. It was a beautiful setting, but as they ate together, he realized that the real beauty wasn't in the extravagant surroundings, it was in the laughter of the twins as they bickered over who would sit next to him, and the way Rachel smiled whenever he tried to tell one of his terrible dad jokes. After dinner, Rachel suggested they go for a walk in the nearby park. The spring air was crisp and the evening was calm, with only a few joggers passing by. They strolled along the path, the kids running ahead, and Jeremy found himself taking a deep breath, enjoying the simplicity of the moment. For the first time in years, he didn't feel the weight of the world on his shoulders. In that moment, he was just a father, walking alongside his children and their mother. "Do you think this is going to work?" Jeremy asked quietly, glancing over at Rachel. "I think it already is," she replied with a smile. "One step at a time. We'll figure it out together." As the evening came to a close, they returned to his penthouse, and Jeremy found himself feeling something he hadn't in a long time: hope. It wasn't going to be easy, nothing worthwhile ever was, but he was ready to put in the effort. He couldn't change the past, but he could shape the future. And for the first time he was willing to try. Before going to the next, please subscribe to our channel, like and share with friends. Jeremy woke up early the next morning, his mind racing as he sat on the edge of his bed. The soft rays of the morning sun streamed through the large windows, casting long shadows across his spacious penthouse. He glanced at the clock, 6:30 a.m. He had always been an early riser, a habit formed by years of running his business, but today was different. Today he had made a decision, one that he couldn't ignore any longer. He was going to fully embrace fatherhood, not just as an obligation but as something he genuinely wanted to be a part of. The realization that this wasn't just a temporary phase, that he wasn't merely a guest in their lives, hit him harder than he expected. The twins had already started to change his outlook on life. They had come into his world, shaking it up, making him realize how hollow his achievements had felt without a family to share them with. And Rachel, well, Rachel was a constant, steadfast presence, even when he hadn't fully earned it. She had given him the benefit of the doubt, trusting him despite his late arrival in their lives. As he walked to the kitchen to make coffee, Jeremy's phone buzzed on the countertop. He reached for it and saw a message from Rachel. "Can you meet me at the kids' school today? I want to talk about something important." His heart skipped a beat. Was this about him? Was she finally going to tell him what she really thought about their future? He had been wondering about her feelings lately, unsure of where they stood after everything that had happened. He quickly typed a reply, "Sure. What time?" "9 a.m. Don't be late," came her response, followed by a smiley face emoji. He chuckled, feeling a little lighter. There was still humor in their relationship, still a hint of the easy connection they had before things got so complicated. As the hours passed, Jeremy's mind kept returning to the school. He knew Rachel had been raising Emma and Ethan on her own for years, but he didn't know much about their daily life, their routines, or the people they interacted with. He wasn't sure what to expect when he arrived, but he knew this meeting was important. It wasn't just about the twins, it was about his role in their lives, how he fit into this new family dynamic. By 8:45 a.m., Jeremy was in his car, making his way to the small suburban school in downtown New Jersey. The traffic wasn't bad and he found himself arriving with plenty of time to spare. He parked in the lot and walked up to the school's entrance, where he saw Rachel standing by the doors, talking to another parent. She glanced over and waved when she saw him, and he waved back, feeling a little nervous. "Hey, you made it," she greeted him, a smile on her face. She looked different today, more relaxed, more open. He noticed she was wearing her usual casual attire, but there was something about her presence that made her seem more at ease than usual. "Yeah, I'm here," Jeremy replied, trying to match her upbeat tone. "What's all this about?" Rachel led him into the school, through a narrow hallway and into the principal's office. Jeremy was surprised. This wasn't the kind of conversation he had expected. The principal, a tall man in his mid-40s, stood up when they entered. His nameplate read, "Mr. Harper." "Mr. Harper, this is Jeremy," Rachel said, introducing him with a small smile. "He's the kid's biological father." Jeremy could feel the tension in the room immediately. Mr. Harper gave him a polite handshake, but his eyes seemed to linger on him with a certain curiosity, maybe even suspicion. It wasn't uncommon for school staff to be cautious when meeting a new parent, especially when that parent had been absent for so long. "Nice to meet you, Jeremy," Mr. Harper said, his voice professional but cool. "We've had a few conversations about the kids, and I wanted to talk to you about some concerns we've noticed lately." Jeremy sat down, his heart starting to pound in his chest. Was there something wrong with the kids? Had they been acting out at school? His mind raced through all the worst-case scenarios. "Is everything okay with Emma and Ethan?" Jeremy asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Yes and no," Mr. Harper replied. "The kids are doing well academically, but we've noticed some behavioral issues. It's not uncommon for children in their situation to have trouble adjusting, especially after a major change like this." Jeremy's brow furrowed. "What do you mean by major change?" Rachel spoke before Mr. Harper could respond. "They've been through a lot, Jeremy. They've been adjusting to the idea of you being a part of their lives. It's not easy for them. They've lived with a single parent for years, and now they have to learn to navigate what it means to have a father figure." Jeremy nodded slowly, understanding the weight of her words. He had been so caught up in his own emotions, his own desire to become a father, that he hadn't fully considered how difficult this transition would be for the kids. They had their own feelings, their own fears. They weren't just dealing with the joy of having a dad, they were also grappling with the fear of losing the life they had known. Mr. Harper continued, "We've also noticed some tension between the twins. They've always been close, but lately, there seems to be a sense of rivalry, almost like they're competing for your attention." Jeremy's heart sank. He hadn't realized it, but now that Mr. Harper mentioned it, he could see it clearly. Emma would often seek out his attention in ways that seemed almost desperate, while Ethan would quietly withdraw, almost as if he was trying to protect himself from the possible rejection. "I think they're just trying to figure out what their relationship with you is going to look like," Rachel said softly. "They love you, Jeremy, but it's going to take time for them to trust that you're really here to stay." The room fell silent for a moment as everyone absorbed the weight of her words. Jeremy realized just how much work lay ahead of him, not just in terms of being a father, but in understanding the emotional complexities of the children he was trying to build a relationship with. "I want to help them," Jeremy said, his voice full of determination. "I know it won't be easy, but I want to be there for them. I want them to know that I'm not going anywhere." Rachel looked at him with a mixture of hope and caution in her eyes. "That's all they need to hear, Jeremy. But you have to show them, not just say it." Jeremy nodded, his resolve firm. He knew she was right. He couldn't just talk the talk, he had to walk the walk. And that meant putting in the effort day in and day out. Before going to the next, please subscribe to our channel, like and share with friends. The days that followed the meeting at the school were a blur for Jeremy. The conversation with Rachel and Mr. Harper had stuck with him, and as he sat at his desk in his downtown Manhattan office, he found himself unable to focus on his usual tasks. His mind kept drifting back to the twins, Emma and Ethan. Their faces, their small gestures, and the way they looked at him with both hope and skepticism were etched in his mind. It was strange. He was accustomed to making high-stakes decisions in business, but the challenge of becoming a father, of connecting with children who barely knew him, seemed more daunting than anything he had ever faced. Rachel had been patient with him, encouraging him to take small steps and allowing him the space to get to know the twins. But even with all her support, Jeremy couldn't shake the feeling of being an outsider in his own family. There were moments when he caught himself wondering if he was doing the right thing. Was he really ready for this? Could he fill the void in the twins' lives, a void that had been shaped by years of Rachel's single-handed efforts? One evening, as he sat in his penthouse watching the sun set behind the skyscrapers, Jeremy received a call from Rachel. Her voice sounded a little strained and his heart skipped a beat. "Jeremy, I need to talk to you," she said, her tone serious. "Is everything okay?" he asked, his anxiety rising. "I'm not sure," Rachel replied. "Emma's been acting out at school again. She's been really withdrawn and I don't know how to help her. She keeps asking about her father, about you. I don't think she really understands why you weren't there for so long, and it's really affecting her." Jeremy ran a hand through his hair, the weight of her words pressing down on him. He knew that Emma had been struggling with the idea of a father figure, but hearing it from Rachel made it feel more real, more urgent. "I'll come over," he said without hesitation. "I'll do whatever I can." Rachel agreed, and within an hour, Jeremy was in his car, heading toward the small suburban neighborhood where she and the twins lived. The familiar streets of New Jersey seemed so different to him now, as if every corner and every turn led to a decision that could change his life forever. As he pulled into the driveway, he saw the twins playing in the front yard, their laughter cutting through the quiet evening air. They looked so carefree, so innocent, but Jeremy knew better now. Behind those smiles was a mix of confusion and hurt, and it was his responsibility to help them through it. Rachel greeted him at the door, her face lined with worry. She led him to the living room where the twins were sitting, their heads down, their attention fixed on their tablets. They didn't immediately acknowledge his presence, and Jeremy felt a pang of guilt. He had been so caught up in his own world that he hadn't considered how his absence had affected them, not just physically but emotionally. "Hey guys," he said, his voice tentative. Emma glanced up first, her blue eyes meeting his for a brief moment before she looked away again. Ethan, who had been sitting beside her, followed her gaze but didn't say anything. "I've been thinking about you two a lot," Jeremy continued, trying to keep his voice steady. "I know I haven't been around much and I'm sorry for that. But I want to be here for you now if you'll let me." Rachel gave him a small, encouraging nod, but the twins remained silent, lost in their own thoughts. The tension in the room was palpable, and Jeremy realized just how much work lay ahead. He wasn't sure where to begin, but he knew that he had to start somewhere. "Emma," he said gently, "can we talk for a minute?" Emma looked up at him, her expression unreadable. She hesitated before putting down her tablet and standing up. Slowly she walked over to the couch and sat next to him. "I know this is hard," Jeremy said, his voice soft but sincere. "I wasn't there when you needed me and I can't change that. But I'm here now and I want to try and be the dad you deserve." Emma didn't respond right away. Instead, she crossed her arms over her chest and looked at the floor. Jeremy could see the wall she had built up around herself, the wall she had put in place to protect her heart from being hurt again. It was clear that she wasn't ready to open up, but Jeremy wasn't going to give up. "I know you're mad at me," he said quietly. "And you have every right to be. I just want you to know that I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to be here whether you want me to be or not. You don't have to forgive me right away, but I hope one day you will." Emma finally looked up at him, her expression softening just a little. "Why weren't you here before?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The question hit him like a punch to the gut. He hadn't expected her to ask, at least not so directly. He had been avoiding this conversation, hoping that time would heal the wounds, but now it seemed unavoidable. I was focused on other things," Jeremy admitted, his voice thick with regret. "I made mistakes, Emma. Big ones. And I know I can't fix the past, but I'm going to try to make things right from now on." The room was quiet for a moment as Emma processed his words. She didn't speak again, but Jeremy could see the wheels turning in her mind. There was hope there but also doubt. He didn't expect her to fully trust him right away, but the fact that she was even engaging with him was progress. Ethan, who had been sitting quietly, suddenly stood up. He didn't say anything but his actions spoke volumes. He walked over to Jeremy and without a word, wrapped his arms around him in a tight hug. Jeremy froze for a moment, surprised by the sudden affection. He had never been a particularly affectionate person, but this small gesture, this silent acceptance from Ethan, melted something inside him. "Thanks, buddy," Jeremy whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Ethan pulled away just as quietly, his face serious but not unkind. The air in the room felt lighter, a small step forward in their fragile relationship. Rachel watched quietly from the doorway, a hopeful look on her face. Jeremy knew that there was still so much to learn, so much to do to truly be the father these kids needed, but for the first time in a long time he felt like he might actually be able to do it. Before going to the next, please subscribe to our channel, like and share with friends. The days following the conversation with Emma and Ethan felt like a slow, cautious dance for Jeremy. Every moment was a new opportunity, but also a reminder of how much time had already been lost. He was still adjusting to the idea of being a father, and he knew that it was not something that could happen overnight. Rachel had been supportive, but there was a part of her that was still unsure, still protective of her children. Jeremy understood that. After all, it had been just the three of them for so long. The idea of bringing in someone new, especially someone who had not been present for their upbringing, was a challenge for everyone involved. One weekend, Rachel invited Jeremy to a school event for the twins. It was an art show at their school in the quiet town of Princeton, New Jersey, and she suggested that it would be a good opportunity for him to spend some time with the kids in a more casual setting. He agreed, though he felt a mix of excitement and nervousness as the date approached. The thought of attending a school function as a father figure was overwhelming, and he wasn't sure how he would fit in. When Jeremy arrived at the school, he was greeted by Rachel, who was standing near the entrance with a big smile on her face. She looked radiant, a contrast to the uncertainty that had clouded her expression the first time they met. "You made it," she said, her voice filled with warmth. "I'm so glad you could come." "I wouldn't miss it," Jeremy replied, trying to sound confident, though his nerves were palpable. "How are the twins?" "They're both excited but a little nervous." "This is a big deal for them," Rachel said. "You should probably go and find them. They'll be thrilled to see you." Jeremy nodded and made his way toward the main hall, where the event was taking place. The walls were lined with student artwork, bright and colorful creations that captured the energy of the school's young artists. As he walked through the crowded hall, he couldn't help but feel like an outsider. Everyone seemed to know each other, and he was the stranger, the man trying to fit into a world that didn't quite feel like his own. He spotted Emma and Ethan near the back of the room, standing next to their art projects. They were talking to a teacher, but when they saw Jeremy, their faces lit up. Emma waved at him excitedly, and Ethan gave him a shy but genuine smile. For a moment, Jeremy felt like he was part of something real, something that mattered. He walked toward them, trying to shake off the butterflies in his stomach. "Hey guys," he said, his voice warm but a little unsure. "How's the art show going?" Emma grinned. "It's awesome. Look at my painting," she said, pointing to a colorful abstract piece on the wall. "I worked really hard on it." Jeremy studied the painting, nodding with approval. It's great, Emma. You're really talented. Ethan was quieter but still proud of his own work. His project was a sculpture made from clay, shaped like a small animal. I made a dog, he said softly, glancing at Jeremy for reassurance. Do you like it? I love it, Jeremy said, crouching down to get a better look at the sculpture. It's awesome, buddy. You've got a real gift. Both twins seemed to relax as they received his praise, and for a brief moment, Jeremy felt a sense of connection with them that he hadn't experienced before. It was small, but it was something. It was a sign that maybe, just maybe, he could become the kind of father they needed him to be. After spending some time admiring their artwork, Rachel came over to join them. Looks like you've made a great impression, she said, smiling at Jeremy. She put a hand on Emma's shoulder, who was still beaming from the attention. You should see the reception they're getting. It's a big deal for them. Jeremy smiled back at Rachel, appreciating the moment, but also feeling the weight of the situation. He had a long road ahead, and he knew that just showing up at an art show wasn't going to be enough to build a lasting relationship with the twins. He had to be there for them, not just in moments like these but consistently, through the highs and the lows, through the everyday challenges of life. As the evening went on, Jeremy spent more time with the twins, watching them interact with their friends and teachers. He felt like a spectator in their world, but it was a world he wanted to be part of. Rachel watched from a distance, her expression softening as she observed how Jeremy was trying. She could see the effort he was putting in, and she was beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could be the father figure the twins had been missing. Later that night, after the event had wrapped up and the twins had gone to bed, Rachel and Jeremy sat on the porch of her house, watching the stars. The evening was cool, and the quiet of the suburban neighborhood surrounded them. Rachel was the first to speak. You're doing great, she said, her voice filled with sincerity. I know it's not easy, but I can see you trying. I think the kids can see it too. Jeremy looked at her, his heart full. I just don't want to mess this up, he admitted. I want to be there for them, Rachel. I want to be the dad they deserve. She smiled softly, her gaze steady. I know you do. And that's what matters. You're already making a difference. They may not show it all the time, but they notice. And so do I. Jeremy leaned back in his chair, taking a deep breath. He had a lot of work to do, a lot of growing to do, but for the first time in a long while, he felt like he was on the right path. There were no guarantees, no promises that everything would work out perfectly. But in that moment, as he sat with Rachel under the stars, he knew that he was finally ready to embrace the challenge of fatherhood, no matter how complicated or uncertain it might be. Before going to the next, please subscribe to our channel, like and share with friends. Jeremy's life had slowly but steadily started to take on a new rhythm in the past few months. The awkwardness he initially felt around Rachel and the twins had faded, replaced by a sense of quiet familiarity. They were becoming a family of sorts, and though it wasn't perfect, nothing ever was, there was something undeniably genuine about what they were building together. He spent more weekends at their house, helping Ethan with his school projects and cheering Emma on at her soccer games. Rachel had become someone he could rely on, not just as a co-parent to the twins, but as a friend, someone who understood the complexities of life in a way he didn't think he would ever find in another person. However, just as things seemed to settle into a comfortable routine, a phone call shattered the calm. It was a Tuesday evening, and Jeremy had just finished dinner when his phone rang. It was from a number he didn't recognize, but something about the way it appeared on his screen made him pause. He picked up. Hello? Jeremy said, trying to mask the sudden unease in his voice. Mr. Daniels? The voice on the other end was calm, almost clinical, but there was an edge to it that made Jeremy's heart rate pick up. Yes, this is Jeremy Daniels. Who is this? My name is Dr. Howard, and I'm calling regarding a recent genetic test we ran. It concerns your paternity, specifically, your connection to 2 children in New Jersey. Jeremy's stomach sank. His mind raced. For a split second he thought he might have misheard. But then the words settled into his consciousness. Paternity? 2 children? It felt like the ground beneath him was shifting, but his body refused to respond. Could you repeat that? Jeremy asked, his voice trembling slightly. What do you mean, paternity? There's been an unusual finding, Dr. Howard continued. A recent genetic match was found between you and 2 children. We believe they may be your biological children based on this DNA evidence. We'd like to speak with you in person to go over the details and see how you wish to proceed. Jeremy was silent for a moment. He couldn't process what was happening. His mind flashed back to Emma and Ethan. The twins. But how could this be? They had already told him that their biological father was someone else. Hadn't they? I think there's been some sort of mistake, Jeremy said finally, his voice steady but uncertain. I have 2 kids, Emma and Ethan. But I'm not their biological father, I'm their stepdad. I've been with their mother Rachel for a while now. Dr. Howard's voice softened. I understand, Mr. Daniels, and I'm sorry for the confusion. But the test results are conclusive. You are genetically related to these children, and we believe you are their biological father. The match came up in our database and it prompted us to contact you. We would like to meet and discuss this further. Jeremy hung up the phone, his hands shaking. It wasn't possible. There was no way. The twins, Emma and Ethan, couldn't be his biological children. He remembered Rachel's story. She had always said the twins were the result of a brief relationship she had before they met. And yet, here he was being told by a complete stranger that he had some undeniable biological connection to them. His mind felt like it was spinning out of control. He needed answers and he needed them fast. This was too big, too important to ignore. After pacing around his apartment for a few minutes, Jeremy made a decision. He had to talk to Rachel. She would know what to do or at least help him make sense of this. He dialed her number, his fingers trembling as he did. When she picked up, he didn't waste any time. Rachel, he said, his voice urgent. We need to talk. Something strange has happened. What is it? Rachel asked, her voice calm but curious. I just got a call from a doctor, Jeremy explained quickly. They ran some kind of genetic test and they say I'm biologically related to Emma and Ethan. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Jeremy could almost hear Rachel processing the words he had just spoken. I don't understand, she said finally. What do you mean? How could that be possible? I don't know, Jeremy replied. But the doctor was clear. They think I'm their biological father. It doesn't make any sense, Rachel. Rachel was quiet for a moment. I need to talk to you about something, she said softly. I wasn't sure if the time was right to tell you, but now it seems like there's no avoiding it. When I met you, I never told you everything about the twins' father. What do you mean? Jeremy asked, confusion flooding his voice. Ethan and Emma, their biological father wasn't just some fling, Rachel said, her voice shaky. He was someone I was with for a while, but things went terribly wrong. He disappeared when I was pregnant with the twins. I always thought he had no idea about them. But Jeremy, he's been in their lives in some way. I never wanted to bring it up, not when we were starting something new. Jeremy felt like the world was crashing down around him. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but they didn't make any sense. Why didn't you tell me this before? He asked, his voice filled with a mixture of frustration and disbelief. I never thought it mattered, Rachel said softly. I thought I could protect you and the kids from the past. I didn't want it to interfere with our future. But now it's all coming back to us. The weight of her words settled heavily on his shoulders. Jeremy had always thought he was a man with control over his own life. But in that moment he realized just how little he truly knew. I need to go talk to this doctor, Jeremy said, his voice hollow. I need answers. I need to know the truth. Rachel's voice was quiet but resolute. I'll be here for you, Jeremy. No matter what happens, we'll figure it out. Jeremy hung up the phone, his thoughts a whirlwind of questions, doubts, and fears. The truth was out there, but it was buried in layers of confusion. And he wasn't sure if he was ready to dig through it. Jeremy's heart was racing as he walked into the doctor's office the following morning. The meeting had been scheduled in a hurry, and he was still trying to piece together everything he had learned the night before. Rachel's revelations, the strange phone call, and the shocking claim about Emma and Ethan's biological father, it was all too much to take in. The clinic was in downtown Newark, a few blocks from where Jeremy lived, and he'd spent the drive trying to prepare himself mentally for whatever was about to unfold. When he entered the office, Dr. Howard was waiting for him, a man in his mid-40s with glasses that seemed permanently perched on the end of his nose. Mr. Daniels, Dr. Howard said with a professional smile, extending his hand. Thank you for coming in. Please take a seat. Jeremy sat down, his hands fidgeting in his lap. I'm not sure I understand what's going on here, he said bluntly. You told me you found some kind of match, but how is that even possible? Dr. Howard nodded and opened a file on his desk. We ran a comprehensive genetic test based on a database of ancestry and medical records. Your DNA matched 2 children in our system, and after further verification, we found that they are genetically linked to you. He paused, letting the words sink in. I know this is hard to believe, Mr. Daniels, but the evidence is clear. The room seemed to close in on Jeremy, and for a moment he couldn't find his voice. I don't know how this could be. I've been with Rachel for years, and she's always said the twins were from a past relationship. I'm their stepdad, not their biological father. Dr. Howard folded his hands in front of him. I understand. But from our findings, we believe you are their biological father. I can't speak to the details of Rachel's past, but this DNA test doesn't lie. You have a direct genetic connection to those children. Jeremy was silent, the weight of the situation overwhelming him. He thought of Emma and Ethan, their innocent faces, their bright eyes. They'd always called him Dad, but now he was unsure if that word held the same meaning. Had Rachel known all along? Had she kept the truth from him to protect him or to protect herself? Before he could ask another question, Dr. Howard stood up and handed him a folder. We can run more tests, of course, but these results are definitive. If you decide to take this further, I can provide you with all the information you need to make an informed decision about your next steps. Jeremy looked down at the folder in his hands. There were so many emotions fighting for control: confusion, betrayal, hope. He thought of Rachel and how much they had been through together. Was this a moment of opportunity or a road to ruin? He wasn't sure. He left the clinic without making a decision. The drive home was long and Jeremy's mind churned with thoughts of what to do next. When he arrived back at his apartment, his phone rang. It was Rachel. He answered quickly, his heart in his throat. Jeremy, I'm so sorry, Rachel said, her voice cracking. I never meant for you to find out like this. I wanted to tell you, I really did, but I didn't know how to. Please understand that I never meant to hurt you. Jeremy's breath caught. Rachel, this is bigger than what you told me. The doctor's results are clear. Emma and Ethan, they're my biological children. And now I have to figure out what that means for us. Rachel was silent for a moment before replying, I know. I'll be here when you're ready to talk. But whatever you decide, we'll face it together. Jeremy felt a sense of calm wash over him. No matter how complicated this situation had become, one thing was clear. He wasn't alone in this. And for the first time since that shocking phone call, he felt ready to face the truth. It wasn't just about biology, it was about family. He took a deep breath, knowing the road ahead wouldn't be easy. But it was a road he was willing to walk step by step. If you've liked this story, please subscribe to our channel, like and share with friends.